This is a celebration of life, a celebration of 50 years of loving, caring, and sharing. Today and every day, we honor and celebrate the lives and marriage of Jobie Jason Ward and Myrtie Lee Gainey Ward. We thank them for all they have done and the difference they have made to every life they have touched. What is a family? People. People who share joys and sorrows. People who fuss and feud, live and laugh. People bound together by a common history, heritage, and love. William Jasper Ward was born February 22, 1853 in Alabama. He was a traveling preacher who married at least 4 times and fathered at least 15 children. His first wife, Gatsy Perkins, was the mother of his first known child, Ezra. Elizabeth Richardson was probably his second wife. She was the mother of most of the children. In 1900, William Jasper married the beautiful Mary Day. She was the daughter of Jeremiah Day and the granddaughter of Susan A. Day. To this marriage were born 4 children: Alvin Arnold, Bama Irene, George Doley, and on November 6, 1906, Jobie Jason Ward was born in Bruce, Walton County, Florida. When Jobie was only 14 months old, Mary Day Ward died of pneumonia. Because of William Jasper's travels, the older children were raised by Dr. Lowry, and little Jobie was raised by John and Betty Linton. On July 12, 1928, Jobie married Bobby Lee Odom, the daughter of John Edward Odom and Sarah Frances Todd Odom. To this marriage were born 7 children: John Cletus, Nola Vivian, Ruby Evelyn, William Angelo, Gerald, Dallas Tillman, and James Ellis Ward. Times were hard, but Jobie and Bobby worked hard to raise their children straight and strong. In October 1941, another child was on the way, but that was not to be. Bobby's last wish was that Jobie keep their family together. God had a very special plan in mind, for this family was to be blessed with not 1 but 2 very loving mothers. After struggling to keep his promise to Bobby and a not-so-subtle reminder from young Vivian, an angel must have whispered in Jobie's ear, perhaps reminding him of the time he had pointed to young Myrtie Lee Gainey and teased Bobby Lee by saying, "She's my next wife." On February 1st, 1942, after a brief courtship, Jobie went to the farm of Mary Mack Gainey and Frances Elizabeth Gainey to ask their permission to marry their daughter, Myrtie Lee, the 6th of their 10 children. There was no reason to delay, so just 2 days later, on February 3rd, 1942, Jobie Jason Ward and Myrtie Lee Gainey were married by a judge in Defuniak Springs, Florida. Myrtie wore a blue dress made by her mother and her Sunday shoes. Young 17-year-old Myrtie took on the responsibilities of a loving wife and mother in a house with 7 children. When she arrived at her new home, all the children except Cletus were sick with measles. Jobie was nearly drafted during the Second World War, but because of the large family he supported, his draft was deferred, and he became a policeman at the shipyards in Panama City, Florida. Jobie remained close to John and Betty Linton and their son Ezra, who was able to serve in the armed forces and was like a brother to Jobie. On February 19, 1943, Jobie and Myrtie blessed their children with a baby sister, Sadie Pearl Ward. Shortly before Sadie was born, they lived briefly in a house where many strange things occurred. Doors and gates refused to stay closed, seeming to open by themselves with no one around. To find a more peaceful home, they first moved to the John Brown house, which was safe but inconvenient in many ways. By the time Sadie was born, Jobie had moved his family to the Smith house, a much better home with big oak trees in front and pecan trees in back. Here, the family later moved to the Vaughn house. Jim and Sadie are here at Jobie's feet playing with a chamber pot. On the last day of school each year, students at the Red Bay School would have a big picnic. The one held on Vivian's last day of school was at Ponce de Leon Springs. The kids were probably anxious for the picture-taking to stop so the fun could begin. After the war, Jobie was laid off from the shipyard and took a job delivering pulpwood, 2 loads a day, working 12 to 14 hours a day for $2.50 a load. In 1945, Jobie began building the first home he could truly call his own. This one would not be called the Smith House or the Vaughn House. This was the Ward House. There was some serious courting going on by then. As some family members tell it, the younger kids would spy on the older kids to see just what they were doing. They might even report any monkey business if you paid them a quarter for their efforts. On June 22, 1946, Nola Vivian Ward married Donald Walton Brown. Also in 1946, Jobie decided that if he was going to work long, hard hours, it should be for himself and his family, not as someone else's employee. He began his own pulpwooding business with Donald Brown and Myrtie's brother, Leonard Ashley Gainey, working for him. John Cletus joined the Army in 1947 and served in Japan. On July 13, 1948, Ruby Evelyn Ward became her own step-aunt when she married Myrtie's brother, Leonard Gainey. Leonard and Ruby first shared part of Jobie and Myrtie's house. One day, a couple of months after they were married, Leonard decided it was time to find a place of their own. Ruby wasn't very happy about the idea of leaving her family, but the problem was solved when Jobie built a small one-room house behind his own home. The first of Jobie and Myrtie's many grandchildren, Joyce Lavelle Gainey, was born in this little house on May 16, 1949. 1949 was a big year for the family in many ways. Cletus came home from the Army, and electricity was hooked up to the Ward house. Favorite memories for the entire family seem to always be of family gatherings, time shared throughout the years. Jobie kept his promise to keep his children together. He and Myrtie raised a family with strong family ties, a closeness very few families have these days. Romance was still blooming in 1950 when John Cletus Ward married Jessie B. Danley on July 21st. This was a Ward and Gainey get-together around the same time Vivian and Donald began the family migration to Washington State. About twice a year, relatives from Columbus, Georgia came to visit. Whenever there's a family reunion, there's plenty to eat. Jim is by the tree. Myrtie's father is in the back with a hat. Who else do you recognize? This was the first truck Jobie owned. He used it in his pulpwood business. Here is Jobie with one of his famous Red Bay body vehicles. Does General Motors know he invented the van? Trigger was a faithful worker in Jobie's pulpwood business. If you treated him with respect, he would treat you the same way. His former owner had trained him to drink liquor, but young Bill got him off that evil stuff and taught him to drink Coca-Cola. Cletus worked for Jobie before he and Jessie moved to Defuniak Springs. No family ever had a better, more hard-working father. Jobie was really proud when he bought this winch to help old Trigger with the heavy work. Jobie and Leonard had lived for a while in Mount Dora in central Florida. In 1951, they returned with their 2 babies to Red Bay. Myrtie's new stove had a water reservoir. Hot water on demand was a real treat. Every morning, Myrtie filled those pans with biscuits to feed the children. Early one winter morning in Red Bay, the children looked out the window to see snow. They gathered all the snow they could find from railings and the hoods of vehicles to build a snowman. Jobie had found there was no profit in pulpwooding, so he bought a small sawmill and moved it onto his own property. A day's production would be about enough lumber to build a small 3-bedroom house. William, Gerald, and Dallas all worked for Jobie. The sawdust pile was a playground for the younger children. Jobie and Myrtie always worked hard for their family, but they always had time to show that love means more than money. Jobie shows off his birthday cake in front of the old smokehouse. Donald and Vivian came home for a vacation and shared watermelon and a day swimming in the creek with the family. In 1953, the migration north continued. Ruby and Leonard with little Joyce and Bill all moved to Washington. On July 17, 1954, Jobie quit the sawmill business and packed up the family to move to Washington. The younger kids didn't like life and school in the big city, and Jobie had been unable to find work. So Jobie, Myrtie, Jim, and Sadie returned to Red Bay in September, leaving Gerald and Dallas behind to work in Swanson's in downtown Aberdeen. After returning to Red Bay from a second attempt to find work in Washington, Jobie had a call from his brother-in-law, Bill Odom, in Melbourne, Florida, with news that Jobie could probably find work in the growing space industry at Cape Canaveral. On January 18, 1955, Jobie, Myrtie, Jim, and Sadie moved to Melbourne to stay with Bill and Ruth Odom while they began their new life. Meanwhile, in Washington, William Angelo Ward, Bill, married Barbara Jean Horton on February 18, 1955. The very next day, on February 19, 1955, Jobie and Myrtie moved their children into their new home in Malabar, Florida. Although Jobie had not yet found work and they were living on the few dollars a month the boys could send them, Jobie and Myrtie had faith that things were going to work out right for them. The house had around 3 acres of land. The total cost was $8,000 with monthly payments of $65. Around the same time, Myrtie, who had worked hard all her life, took the first job she had ever been paid to do. She became a housekeeper and babysitter. The $4 a day she earned really helped make ends meet during those tough times. Finally, things really turned around for them when on May 2, 1955, Jobie was hired as a supply clerk by Pan American at Cape Canaveral. The Washington branch of the Ward family kept right on growing. On April 5, 1957, Gerald Ward and Mary Rice were married, adding another daughter-in-law to the family. All through the 50s and 60s, the family grew and grew and grew. While other family members changed diapers, Dallas joined the Marines and served his country in Japan and Cuba. Myrtie was not very happy when one day in 1959, Melbourne High School called to tell her Jim had quit school in his senior year to play in a band. The same year, Bill and Barb moved to Malabar, setting up a trailer behind Jobie and Myrtie's house. Dallas returned to the United States, and on August 15, 1961, he married Marcia Wright. Cletus, Jessie B., John Allen, and Lisa Diane never moved from Northwest Florida. Jim was drafted into the Army July 17, 1963, and served in Korea. During the summer of 1964, Jobie and Myrtie piled all the Malabar wards into a 1962 Falcon van to have a reunion with the Washington branch of the family. Barb and Bill's kids all came down with measles during the trip. Most of these children have children of their own now. Donald and Vivian Brown's children are Wendell, Donna, Margaret, and Geraldine. Leonard and Ruby Gainey's children are Joyce, Donald, Mackie, Larry, Nola, and Verlin. Another son, Rodney, was adopted a short time later. Gerald and Mary Ward's children are Rowena, Philip, and Cheryl. Jobie and Myrtie celebrated their 24th wedding anniversary at a party at the house Dallas and Jim shared. Barb and Bill provided the beautiful cake. 1966 was a busy year for the Florida Ward family. There were fishing and skiing trips, a flat tire or two, and good times with the kids. Bill and Barb's kids are Bob, Billy, Kathy, and Jody. Christmas 1966 at the OK Corral. On February 3rd, 1967, Jobie and Myrtie celebrated their silver anniversary. 8 days later, on February 11th, 1967, Jim and Diane Larson were married on a trip to Defuniak Springs, the same town where Jobie and Myrtie were married. On June 11th, 1967, Dallas and Susan Cummings were married in Ogallie, Florida. And the family kept on growing. Jobie proved Halloween isn't just for kids when he dressed up to take some of Bill and Ruth Odom's grandchildren trick-or-treating. In 1969, Jobie, Myrtie, and Sadie took a vacation trip to Washington. Sadie met Bill Lemon, and they all agreed it would be a good idea to move to Washington to stay after Jobie's retirement. On July 11, 1967, Sadie Pearl Ward and Bill Lemon were married. Bill's children, Wayne, Warren, Julie, and Corina, became 4 new grandchildren for Jobie and Myrtie. The summer of 1970 was another time of reunion in Washington. There were gifts to take home. Another special gift, their first great-grandchild, Michelle, was born to Ruby's daughter, Joyce, that November. The fun went on in Florida when Bill built a swimming pool behind the trailer. Dallas's daughter Lisa is on the left, Jim's son David is in the floating seat, and Bill's Kathy and Billy played lifeguard for this 4th of July family gathering. David and Lisa shared a kiss and a pickle that day. Spring of 1971 found a trailer being built in preparation for the move to Washington. Meanwhile, a house was being readied for their arrival. In June of 1971, Bill and Barb decided to beat Jobie and Myrtie to Washington, so they packed up their family and headed west. Jim and Diane's children are David and Julie. Juliana Marie was born October 29, 1971. She was the last grandchild born to Jobie and Myrtie. On February 25, 1972, Jobie retired from Pan Am after almost 17 years of service. He and Myrtie soon said goodbye to the house in Malabar. On March 11th, they arrived at their new home, ready to begin retirement surrounded by loved ones. Following the family tradition, Jim, Diane, David, and Julie moved to Washington. They arrived on November 16th and stayed with Bill and Barb until they got settled in Aberdeen. That was the winter of the big snow, frozen pipes, and flu. Thanksgiving 1972 was a celebration held at Bill and Barb's. In February 1973, Myrtie and Jobie received a special gift for their 31st anniversary. A family tree quilt which features handprints of their children and grandchildren. In July of 1973, a silver wedding anniversary party was held at Bill and Barb's to honor Leonard and Ruby's marriage. By the day of Jobie and Myrtie's 50th anniversary, Donald and Vivian, Leonard and Ruby, Cletus and Jessie B, Bill and Barb, and Gerald and Mary will have all long passed their silver anniversaries, and Jim and Diane will celebrate theirs 1 week later. The oldest grandchild, Joyce Gainey Donaldson, and her husband Dave will reach their 25th anniversary on December 27, 1992. For Jobie and Myrtie's 32nd anniversary, a grand party was held, with each family raffling off boxed lunches. Since 1980, there have been Ward family reunions each summer. These special times follow that tradition started all those years ago in Florida's Panhandle. Each one brings back memories of time shared and reminds us of the loving ties with those who are with us, as well as those who are no longer with us. There is joy in memories, joy in celebrating the lives of those we love. The family now totals nearly 150 people. Today and every day, Jobie and Myrtie, we celebrate you.
The following poem was adapted by Ruby Ward Gainey, but the words and the love they show come from all of us. Thanks, Mom and Dad. We've sent bouquets for Mother's Day, for Father's Day, a gift and a card. While they came from the heart, they all fell short of saying how special you both are. It wasn't till we were up and gone, married, raising kids of our own, giving them the love that you taught us each day, that we realized we owed you a debt we could never repay. So thanks again for working and giving, struggling so hard to make a living, for the food on our table and the home that you made us, for forging us into a strong family bond, but most of all, Daddy, for Mary and Mom. To our beautiful lifelong friends, hey Mom and Daddy, thanks again.